Winter.
Winter is the coldest season of the year in temperate climates, between autumn and spring. It is caused by the axis of the Earth in the respective hemisphere being oriented away from the Sun. Different cultures define different dates as the start of winter, and some use a definition based on weather, but when it is winter in the Northern Hemisphere it is summer in the Southern Hemisphere, and vice versa. In many regions, winter is associated with snow and freezing temperatures. At the winter solstice, the days are shortest and the nights are longest, with days lengthening as the season progresses after the solstice.
Cause.
The tilt of the Earth's axis relative to its orbital plane plays a big role in the weather. The Earth is tilted at an angle of 23.44° to the plane of its orbit, and this causes different latitudes on the Earth to directly face the Sun as the Earth moves through its orbit. It is this variation that primarily brings about the seasons. When it is winter in the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere faces the Sun more directly and thus experiences warmer temperatures than the Northern Hemisphere. Conversely, winter in the Southern Hemisphere occurs when the Northern Hemisphere is tilted more toward the Sun. From the perspective of an observer on the Earth, the winter Sun has a lower maximum altitude in the sky than the summer Sun. During winter in either hemisphere, the lower altitude of the Sun causes the sunlight to hit that hemisphere at an oblique angle. In regions experiencing winter, the same amount of solar radiation is spread out over a larger area. This effect is compounded by the larger distance that the light must travel through the atmosphere, allowing the atmosphere to dissipate more heat. Compared with these effects, the changes in the distance of the Earth from the Sun are negligible.
Meteorological reckoning.
Meteorological winter is the method of measuring the winter season used by meteorologists based on sensible weather patterns for record-keeping purposes, so the start of meteorological winter can change depending on how far north one lives. Winter is often defined by meteorologists to be the 3 calendar months with the lowest average temperatures. This corresponds to the months of December, January and February in the Northern Hemisphere, and June, July and August in the Southern Hemisphere. The coldest average temperatures of the season are typically experienced in January or February in the Northern Hemisphere and in June or July in the Southern Hemisphere. Nighttime predominates in the winter season, and in some regions winter has the highest rate of precipitation as well as prolonged dampness because of permanent snow cover or high precipitation rates coupled with low temperatures, precluding evaporation. Blizzards often develop and cause many transportation delays. Diamond dust, also known as ice needles or ice crystals, forms at temperatures approaching 40 DEGF, 40 DEGC, due to air with slightly higher moisture from a loft mixing with colder, surface-based air. They are made of simple ice crystals that are hexagonal in shape. Accumulations of snow and ice are commonly associated with winter in the Northern Hemisphere, due to the large land masses there. In the Southern Hemisphere, the more maritime climate and the relative lack of land south of 40 DEGS makes the winters milder. Thus, snow and ice are less common in inhabited regions of the Southern Hemisphere. In this region, snow occurs every year in elevated regions such as the Andes, the Great Dividing Range in Australia, and the mountains of New Zealand, and also occurs in the southerly Patagonia region of South America. Snow occurs year-round in Antarctica.
Astronomical and other calendar-based reckoning.
In the Northern Hemisphere, some authorities define the period of winter based on astronomical fixed points, that is based solely on the position of the Earth in its orbit around the Sun, regardless of weather conditions. In one version of this definition, winter begins at the winter solstice and ends at the vernal equinox. These dates are somewhat later than those used to define the beginning and end of the meteorological winter, usually considered to span the entirety of December, January, and February in the Northern Hemisphere and June, July, and August in the Southern. Astronomically, the winter solstice, being the day of the year which has fewest hours of daylight, ought to be the middle of the season, but seasonal lag means that the coldest period normally follows the solstice by a few weeks. In the USA and Canada, and sometimes in Britain, The season is regarded as beginning at the solstice and ending on the following equinox. In the Northern Hemisphere, depending on the year, this corresponds to the period between 21st or 22nd December and 20th or 21st March. In the UK, meteorologists consider winter to be the three coldest months of December, January and February. In Scandinavia, winter traditionally begins on October 14 and ends on the last day of February. In Russia currently calendar winter starts on December 1 and lasts through to the end of February, though traditionally it was reckoned from the Christmas, December 25 and Julian calendar, or January 7 and Gregorian, until the Annunciation, March 25 and Julian. In many countries in the Southern Hemisphere, including Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, winter begins on June 1 and ends on August 31. In Celtic nations such as Ireland, using the Irish calendar, and in Scandinavia, the winter solstice is traditionally considered as midwinter, with the winter season beginning November 1, on All Hallows, or Samhain. Winter ends and spring begins on Imbolc, or Candlemas, which is 1st or 2nd February. This system of seasons is based on the length of days exclusively. The 3-month period of the shortest days and weakest solar radiation occurs during November, December and January in the Northern Hemisphere and May, June and July in the Southern Hemisphere. Also, many mainland European countries tend to recognize Martinmas or St. Martin's Day, November 11, as the first calendar day of winter. The day falls at midpoint between the old Julian equinox and solstice dates. Also, Valentine's Day, February 14, is recognized by some countries as heralding the first rites of spring, such as flowers blooming. In Chinese astronomy and other East Asian calendars, winter is taken to commence on or around November 7, with the Jiki, known as Lidong, literally, establishment of winter. The 3-month period associated with the coldest average temperatures typically begins somewhere in late November or early December in the Northern Hemisphere and lasts through late February or early March. This thermological winter is earlier than the solstice delimited definition, but later than the daylight, Celtic, definition. Depending on seasonal lag, this period will vary between climatic regions. Cultural influences such as Christmas creep may have led to the winter season being perceived as beginning earlier in recent years, although high-latitude countries like Canada are usually well into their real winters before the December solstice.
Ecological reckoning and activity.
Ecological reckoning of winter differs from calendar-based methods by avoiding the use of fixed dates. It is one of 6 seasons recognized by most ecologists who customarily use the term hibernal for this period of the year, the other ecological seasons being prevernal, vernal, estival, serotinal, and autumnal. The hibernal season coincides with the main period of biological dormancy each year whose dates vary according to local and regional climates in temperate zones of the Earth. The appearance of flowering plants like the crocus can mark the change from ecological winter to the prevernal season as early as late January in mild temperate climates. To survive the harshness of winter, many animals have developed different behavioral and morphological adaptations for overwintering. Migration is a common effect of winter upon animals, notably birds. However, the majority of birds do not migrate, the cardinal and European robin, for example. Some butterflies also migrate seasonally. Hibernation is a state of reduced metabolic activity during the winter. Some animals sleep during winter and only come out when the warm weather returns. For example, gophers, frogs, snakes, and bats. Some animals store food for the winter and live on it instead of hibernating completely. This is the case for squirrels, beavers, skunks, badgers, and raccoons. Resistance is observed when an animal endures winter but changes in ways such as color and musculature. The color of the fur or plumage changes to white, in order to be confused with snow, and thus retains its cryptic coloration year-round. Examples are the rock ptarmigan, Arctic fox, weasel, white-tailed jackrabbit, and mountain hare. Some fur-coated mammals grow a heavier coat during the winter. This improves the heat retention qualities of the fur. The coat is then shed following the winter season to allow better cooling. The heavier coat in winter made it a favorite season for trappers, who sought more profitable skins. Snow also affects the ways animals behave. Many take advantage of the insulating properties of snow by burrowing in it. Mice and voles typically live under the snow layer. Some annual plants never survive the winter. Other annual plants require winter cold to complete their life cycle. This is known as vernalization. As for perennials, many small ones profit from the insulating effects of snow by being buried in it. Larger plants, particularly deciduous trees, usually let their upper part go dormant, but their roots are still protected by the snow layer. Few plants bloom in the winter, one exception being the flowering plum, which flowers in time for Chinese New Year. The process by which plants become acclimated to cold weather is called hardening.
Exceptionally cold winters.
1683 to 1684, the Great Frost, when the Thames, hosting one of many River Thames Frost Fairs, was frozen all the way up to the London Bridge and remained frozen for about 2 months. Ice was about 27 centimetres, 11 in, thick in London and about 120 centimetres, 47 in, thick in Somerset. The sea froze up to 2 miles, 3.2 kilometres, out around the coast of the southern North Sea, causing severe problems for shipping and preventing use of many harbours. 1739 to 1740, one of the most severe winters in the UK on record. The Thames remained frozen over for about 8 weeks. The Irish famine of 1740 to 1741 claimed the lives of at least 300,000 people. 1816 was the year without a summer in the Northern Hemisphere. The unusual coolness of the winter of 1815 to 1816 and of the following summer was primarily due to the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, in April 1815. There were secondary effects from an unknown eruption or eruptions around 1810, and several smaller eruptions around the world between 1812 and 1814. The cumulative effects were worldwide, but were especially strong in the eastern USA, Atlantic Canada, and northern Europe. Frost formed in May in New England, killing many newly planted crops, and the summer never recovered. Snow fell in New York and Maine in June, and ice formed in lakes and rivers in July and August. In the UK, snowdrifts remained on hills until late July, and the Thames froze in September. Agricultural crops failed and livestock died in much of the Northern Hemisphere, resulting in food shortages and the worst famine of the 19th century. 1887 to 1888, there were record cold temperatures in the upper Midwest, heavy snowfalls worldwide, and amazing storms, including the schoolhouse blizzard of 1888, in the Midwest in January, and the Great Blizzard of 1888, in the eastern US and Canada in March. In Europe, the winters of early 1947, February 1956, 1962 to 1963, 1981 to 1982 and 2009 to 2010 were abnormally cold. The UK winter of 1946 to 1947 started out relatively normal, but became one of the snowiest UK winters to date, with nearly continuous snowfall from late January until March.
Other historically significant winters.
1310 to 1330, many severe winters and cold, wet summers in Europe, the first clear manifestation of the unpredictable weather of the Little Ice Age that lasted for several centuries, from about 1300 to 1900. The persistently cold, wet weather caused great hardship, was primarily responsible for the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, and strongly contributed to the weakened immunity and malnutrition leading up to the Black Death, 1348 to 1350, 1600 to 1602, extremely cold winters in Switzerland and Baltic region after eruption of Huayna in Peru in 1600, 1607 to 1608, in North America, ice persisted on Lake Superior until June. Londoners held their first frost fair on the frozen-over River Thames, 1622, in Turkey, the Golden Horn and southern section of Bosphorus froze over, 1690s, extremely cold, snowy, severe winters. Ice surrounded Iceland for miles in every direction, 1779 to 1780, Scotland's coldest winter on record, and ice surrounded Iceland in every direction, like in the 1690s. In the USA, a record 5-week cold spell bottomed out at 20 DEGF, 29 DEGC, at Hartford, Connecticut, and 16 DEGF, 27 DEGC, in New York City. Hudson River and New York's harbor froze over. 1783 to 1786, the Thames partially froze, and snow remained on the ground for months. In February 1784, the North Carolina was frozen in Chesapeake Bay. 1794 to 1795, severe winter, with the coldest January in the UK and lowest temperature ever recorded in London. 21 DEGC. 6 DEGF, on January 25. The cold began on Christmas Eve and lasted until late March, with a few temporary warm-ups. The Severn and Thames froze, and frost fairs started up again. The French army tried to invade the Netherlands over its frozen rivers, while the Dutch fleet was stuck in its harbour. The winter had easterlies, from Siberia, as its dominant feature, 1813 to 1814, severe cold, last freeze-over of Thames, and last frost fair. Removal of Old London Bridge and changes to rivers' banks made freeze-overs less likely. 1883 to 1888, colder temperatures worldwide, including an unbroken string of abnormally cold and brutal winters in the upper Midwest, related to the explosion of Krakatoa in August 1883. There was snow recorded in the UK as early as October and as late as July during this time period. 1976 to 1977, one of the coldest winters in the U.S. in decades. 1985, Arctic outbreak in U.S. resulting from shift in polar vortex, with many cold temperature records broken. 2002 to 2003 was an unusually cold winter in the northern and eastern USA. 2010 to 2011, persistent bitter cold in the entire eastern half of the USA from December onward, with few or no midwinter warm-ups, and with cool conditions continuing into spring. La Niña and negative Arctic oscillation were strong factors. Heavy and persistent precipitation contributed to almost constant snow cover in the northeastern U.S. which finally receded in early May. 2011 was one of the coldest on record in New Zealand with sea level snow falling in Wellington in July for the first time in 35 years and a much heavier snowstorm for 3 days in a row in August. 2011 to 2012, one of the warmest winters. Christmas Day 2011 was the warmest Christmas in Ireland, as observed by the Armagh Observatory.
Humans in winter.
Humans evolved in tropical climates, and met cold weather as they migrated into Eurasia, although earlier populations certainly encountered Southern Hemisphere winters in southern Africa. Microevolution in Caucasian, Asiatic and Inuit people show some adaptation to the climate.
Winter and human health.
Humans are sensitive to cold, see hypothermia. Snow blindness, norovirus, seasonal depression, slipping on black ice and falling icicles are other health concerns associated with cold and snowy weather. In the Northern Hemisphere, it is not unusual for homeless people to die from hypothermia in the winter.
Festivals.
Chinese New Year. The usual starting date is the second new moon after the winter solstice, that is between mid-January and mid-February in the Gregorian calendar. Christmas, New Year's Eve, Pausch Mela.
Mythology. In various cultures.
In Persian culture the winter solstice is called Yorda, meaning birth, and it has been celebrated for thousands of years. It is referred to as the eve of the birth of Mithra, who symbolized light, goodness and strength on earth. In Greek mythology, Hades kidnapped Persephone to be his wife. Zeus ordered Hades to return her to Demeter, the goddess of the earth and her mother. However, Hades tricked Persephone into eating the food of the dead, so Zeus decreed that Persephone would spend 6 months with Demeter and 6 months with Hades. During the time her daughter is with Hades, Demeter became depressed and caused winter. In Welsh mythology, Gwyn ap Nudd abducted a maiden named Cariadilad. On May Day, her lover, Gwydr ap Rheidol, fought Gwyn to win her back. The battle between them represented the contest between summer and winter.
Personifications.
Old Man Winter, also known as Father Winter, Jack Frost, Deadmeras, Snegaroka, Vetr, Sinterklaas etc. In Bengali the advent of winter is often expressed by the sentence Shita Buri Ashchitai, which means the winter old woman is coming fast. This is used especially when it is said to a child